You might have heard how people sometimes suggest and argue that Donald Trump has a transactional approach to politics. I think most of what he does on national and global scale is driven by a real estate imagination. If we understand this, then it's easier somewhat to understand why he does the things the way he does. And then what are the implications of that? So let's delve into the real estate imagination of Donald Trump. So, first, what do I mean by real estate imagination? Keep in mind that my explanation is going to be a bit philosophical, but it's not hard to grasp. A real estate imagination is instrumental in nature. It's driven by instrumental logic. Now, what is instrumental logic? Instrumental logic is when a person or a group looks at the world or the people in it and understands them only from the point of view of how could they be made useful if they are people, or how could land be made profitable towards an end, right? So that's instrumental logic. Everything that you encounter in the world is connected to its utility and is driven for its use towards an end. The process doesn't really matter much, the outcome. So instrumental logic is, in a way, outcome driven. And if you're a businessman, it's profit driven. Now, if we apply that to what I am considering the real estate imagination or the real estate logic, think of it. What do real estate developers do, especially in urban areas, but also in rural areas? They look at a piece of land or they look at an urban neighborhood which might be poor, right? Which might not have what a middle class person would need. And then they use the law and the coercive force of the state and money to oust the people who live there or to buy them out slowly or in one grand move and then develop that piece of land for upper middle class and rich people, right? So the real estate imagination then sees a piece of land, inhabited or not, and thinks of it instrumentally as something that they can make into a profit earning enterprise. How do they justify it to themselves? Like, legalistically, basically, they will say, we paid these people the market price, which never really is the case. Most of the times the people are driven out, right, or isolated and brought to a point where they have to sell. A lot of coercive legal measures are used. I mean, Trump historically has used them in his own work in the United States, right? What is crucial to understand is that this imagination does not take into account the people whose lives are impacted by the real estate decisions. Now, not just Donald Trump, this kind of applies to all mega real estate developers. In my own native country, Pakistan, there is one organization which is the largest home builder, luxury home builder in Pakistan. And what they've done is, through coercive means of the state, they have literally moved communities, living, thriving villages, ousted them, bought them out, and sometimes occupied their lands to build these massive neighborhoods for the aspirant middle class. Now, the consequence of that is when you disperse the people who lived as a living community, of course, they lose that communal aspect of their life. And since not much is provided to them by way of supporting their lives or bettering their lives, then their struggles become manifold, not just poverty, but also loss of community. So a real estate imagination then drives this idea that things can be made better if we could build something that people would like to come to, or if we could own more land, more property, and make it better. Now let's look at Mr. Trump's statements, actions, or policies that he has announced so far. In his statements, claiming Gulf of Mexico to be Gulf of America is driven by that real estate imagination. It does nothing materially for anyone, doesn't change anyone's life, even Americans who might be, jumping up and down for that. It gives them nothing other than we named Gulf of Mexico Gulf of America. But it's claiming a territory which is not necessarily American to be American. Making statements like Canada should become the 51st state of United States. That's a real estate claim. Trump sees this nation of 40 million people north of United States, rich in resources, and he just assumes that he can say that, not factoring into it the hopes, aspirations, and the independent national thought processes of 40 million Canadians, right? Because his idea is driven by capturing more territory or subsuming it under the larger territory of United States. His statements about the Panama Canal. Now, the Panama Canal was ceded to Panama under a treaty that United States signed. Now, when Trump looks at it and sees it at its own, that's completely driven by this imagination that we spent money to build it, we need to own it, disregarding the treaty obligations and the hopes and aspirations of a smaller nation that owns the canal, right? Now, the greatest and probably the saddest example of this real estate imagination is Trump's purported solution to the Palestinian-Israeli problem, especially in Gaza. So what he sees is a destroyed piece of land. He never mentions who destroyed it, right? Israeli armed forces using US ammunitions destroyed Gaza. But all he's saying is, oh, it's not worth going back to, so we're going to relocate you to another country. So we are going to cause a massive redisplacement of Palestinian people. And then we are going to build it into this beautiful place where everyone wants to come to. But the Palestinians cannot come back to that. That is classic real estate imagination at play at such a grand and tragic scale. Similarly, acquiring Greenland. What drives it? It's important to our national interest. It's important to our national interest, so Denmark should sell it to us. There is no option there for people of Greenland who have been wanting to be independent that they should become an independent nation. No, we want to acquire it. Because if you think of the world in terms of real estate, you're not thinking altruistically. You're thinking of either owning that piece of land or turning it into something that will make you money and profit. So these are some of the examples of Donald Trump's real estate imagination at play. Now, what are the consequences of that for the United States, but also for the world? I think the main consequence of that is that people of the world will start distrusting United States more. I mean, not that there is a lot of trust of United States policies in the world, but it will erode further because it becomes blatantly clear to the world that all America wants is more land, more resources, more territory. I mean, another example of that is what Trump has offered to Ukraine. We will secure you, we will help you if you give us the rights to your rare minerals. And the news just came out that The Ukrainian president has refused to sign the deal that was sent to him because it gives United States the exclusive rights to their rare minerals, but doesn't offer anything in return. So this is kind of a real estate deal where you are actually not even offering anything in return. You're just taking it because a country is weak and it's in a state of war and might need your help. So those are the ultimate consequences of this imagination. What it will do then is make more and more people in the world hostile to United States. And they will start seeing the US, the nakedness of US ambition and power to dominate and control global resources. Now, I have no doubt that the United States actions in the world are already and have always been driven by this idea of controlling more and more resources. But at least that was couched in the language of diplomacy. You had to kind of sift through the details to figure out exactly what is it that they are trying to do. If you remember the Second Gulf War, there were like two ways of presenting it. One was, this is a war against terrorism and all, which was a false narrative. But underlining that was privatization of Iraqi oil, right? That was the mission. That was the aim, right? People figured it out, but the war wasn't launched under the pretext of we need Iraqi oil and we need to privatize it. But the way Mr. Trump's imagination, the real estate imagination, encourages him to state things or makes him state things is that there is no veil left. It is the blatant, aggressive face of America that the world sees more and more. Now, yes, it might make Mr. Trump's base feel like, oh, we are strong and the world is afraid of us, right? Maybe. But the question for United States, Mr. Trump and anyone else is, what kind of a global power do you want to be? Do you want to be a power that is feared? Fine. Maybe that would work for a little while. But in the long run, when you have a need for allies, for people who would take a stand for you and your people, if you have subjugated them through fear, chances are if they get another alternative, another power comes along and says, hey, we'll do the same for you, but without coercion, without fear, people will opt for that. So United States in the long run will become increasingly more isolated, and the number of people in the world hostile to United States, both semiotically in terms of their language and materially, will keep on increasing. So in the end, neither would Mr. Trump be able to gain what he imagines the United States owns or must own. I mean, Canadians are never going to accede to this idea that they become the 51st state, right? But as sloganeering, it might work for him and for his ilk, but at the end of the day, it will make this world a more hostile place for United States and a more unstable place. And when the world is unstable, it doesn't stay in small pockets of the world. It travels, and it will eventually visit United States as well. That instability, right? That kind of fear. So that's what my thoughts are on this idea of the real estate imagination. Please watch out, see where else he and his lieutenants talk about the world in this transactional and real estate imaginative way. And, share your thoughts and ideas with me. I'll be glad to hear those. Thank you so much for your support. I hope this was useful to you. I will now see you next time. Until then, as always, peace and love.